Have you ever heard of the Akashic Records? It's a concept that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie or some ancient myth. This idea of a universal library that has the entire history of, well, everything. So let's unpack what it really is, where the idea actually came from, and why it's still such a powerful and fascinating concept for so many people. I mean, just imagine this for a second. What if every single thing that's ever happened, every word you've ever said, every choice you've ever made, and maybe even every future possibility was all stored in one single place? Not on some server farm in the desert, but in a kind of cosmic, energetic field. That right there is the fundamental idea behind the Akashic Records. So what are they exactly? Well, if you ask proponents, they'll tell you the Akashic Records are a dimension of consciousness. It's like an energetic library that holds a vibrational record of every single soul's journey. You could think of it as a spiritual Google, or, and I love this analogy, as the famous psychic Edgar Cayce called it, the universe's supercomputer system. Now, today, people who try to access the records aren't, usually asking for next week's lottery numbers. It's much more personal than that. They're looking for deep, personal insight. They want to understand why certain patterns keep showing up in their lives, maybe heal old wounds, and find some guidance that helps them align with what they feel is their soul's true purpose. It's really used as a tool for spiritual self-discovery. Okay, so you might be thinking, this sounds a whole lot like past life regression, right? And that's a fair point, but there's actually a pretty key difference. Past life regression often uses hypnosis to get you to relive specific and often pretty intense past memories. Accessing the Akashic Records, on the other hand, is described more like getting a high-level 30,000-foot view, a conversation or a download of information about your soul's entire journey, not just a deep dive into one specific traumatic life. So, this has to be some ancient wisdom, right? Passed down for thousands of years from mystics in India or Tibet? Well, this is where the story gets really interesting, because the history of this term, it's much, much more recent and way more Western than most people realize. Get this. The person who introduced the core idea of Akasha to the Western world was Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy. Now, she definitely wrote about things like indestructible tablets of the astrolight, but here is the absolute crucial point. She never, not even once, used the phrase Akashic Records. So where did the idea actually come from? Well, it all started with the Sanskrit word Akasha. And originally, that word just meant space, or ether, or sky. In Hindu philosophy, it's considered the primordial substance, the very first, most fundamental element from which everything else is created. See the difference? It's the cause of existence, not a record of it. So how did we get from a simple word for space to a cosmic supercomputer? It happened in a few key steps. First, in 1881, a theosophist named Henry Steele Olcott was the first to link Akasha with the idea of a permanent record. Then, in 1899, another theosophist, C.W. Leadbeater, officially coined the actual phrase Akashic Records in his book. But it was really Edgar Cayce, the famous sleeping prophet, who blasted the concept into the public imagination through his thousands and thousands of psychic readings. So you have to wonder, why did this idea of a giant cosmic record take hold so strongly in the late 19th century? Well, it turns out it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was perfectly, and I mean perfectly, in tune with the scientific and philosophical ideas of that exact time. I mean, think about what was happening back then. Physicists were seriously debating the existence of the ether, this invisible universal substance that they thought filled all of space and carried light waves. At the same time, philosophers were totally wrapped up in determinism, the idea that every single event is caused by a previous one, creating this perfect, predictable chain reaction. And that led to a pretty wild thought experiment. This whole mindset is just brilliantly captured by the French mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace. He imagined this vast intelligence, which people later called Laplace's demon, that could know the exact location and momentum of every single atom in the universe. And he said that for a being like that, quote, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, as the past, would be present to its eyes. I mean, come on, doesn't that sound an awful lot like the Akashic Records? So after Leadbeater gave it a name, other really influential figures just ran with it. You had Rudolf Steiner, who claimed to use the records to write down the lost histories of Atlantis. Alice Bailey came along and poetically describes them as an immense photographic film. And of course, As we saw, Edgar Cayce basically took the whole thing mainstream, doing over 14,000 readings that he claimed were pulled directly from this cosmic library. Okay, so that's the pretty surprising history. But how do people look at the records today? Well, broadly speaking, you can kind of break it down into three very distinct camps. The views are actually quite different. So first, you've got the modern practitioner's view. For them, the records are a real, hands-on, experiential tool for healing and guidance. Then you have the original, more philosophical, theosophical view, which, and this is important, makes a very specific distinction. And finally, of course, you have the skeptical perspective, which basically sees the whole thing as an untestable belief with zero evidence. And this is where we see that original theosophical distinction so clearly. For them, true Akasha is space itself, the divine cause of literally everything. The so-called Akashic records that psychics claim to read, they believed that was something else entirely, reflections in the astral light, which they considered to be a lower, more illusory, and frankly, less reliable plane of existence. It's a really fascinating philosophical split. So, after digging into all of this, what's the big picture? What's the takeaway? The story of the Akashic Records is really the story of how a powerful idea can morph and evolve over time into something its originators might not even recognize. So let's sum it all up. The Akashic Records, as we talk about them today, are a modern Western idea, period. They're not some ancient Eastern teaching. The concept evolved from the Sanskrit word for space, but it was heavily shaped by the scientific obsessions of the 19th century. And today, what they are, well, that really just depends on who you ask. When you look at the whole arc, this concept has made an absolutely incredible journey. It went from this very abstract philosophical idea about the nature of space itself and transformed into something intensely personal, a spiritual supercomputer that people turn to for guidance in their own lives. And that leaves us with one final question to chew on. What are the Akashic Records? A timeless spiritual truth that was finally revealed to us? A fascinating modern invention that really just reflects the hopes and anxieties of its time? Or maybe it's something else entirely, a powerful metaphor for the idea that all of our lives, all our actions and thoughts are deeply interconnected, echoing through the universe in ways we might never fully grasp. That, I think, is for you to decide.